welcome to everybody. I appreciate each and every one of you coming out this morning for this really important dedication of this sculpture. It's a beautiful day, and I see it surrounded by beautiful people. So thank you for being here. Upon the final ratification of the 19th Amendment, which opened up voting to women in all levels of election throughout the United States, Carrie Chapman Catt, the founder of the League of Women Voters, she said, "The vote is in the emblem of your equality, women of America, the guarantee of your liberty. That vote has been costly. Prize it. The vote is a power, a weapon of offense and defense, a prayer. Use it intelligently, conscientiously, and prayerfully." I think that says a lot right there. Today we are here to dedicate the sculpture, Every Word We Utter, and the Women's Suffrage Centennial Plaza, and to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Arkansas adopting the 19th Amendment. As I look, that deserves an applause. As I look around, I'm thrilled to see so many familiar faces and so many interested guests. Each and every person here is important and key to our gathering. There are a few that I would like to recognize. Governor Asa Hutchinson and First Lady Susan, he will be introduced later. Mayor Frank Scott Jr. and Representative French Hill's wife, Martha, Stacy Hurst, Secretary of Parks, Heritage, and Tourism. Dean Compuris, founder of Sculpture at the River Market and the City Board of Directors. And Kay Arnold. Kay played a strategic role in pulling this entire effort together from the very beginning. Also want to recognize the Sculpture at the River Market Committee. Their efforts and support are the ones that actually made this happen. I want to recognize the City Board of Directors that are here and city employees. So many have played a major role from the very beginning. We have with us today a delegation of young people from Central High School. They are some of the finest and brightest and are here today to honor the past and represent our future. I want the Central students to stand up. They're all right, I think right in here, and wave your hand. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Nancy for helping to get this organized. A heartfelt thank you goes to a few other people. First and foremost, I want to say that none of this would have been possible without our amazing donors. And of course, Jane Dedecker right here, who had the vision and the talent to create this beautiful and important piece of art. But you, our donors, are the ones who made it possible to host this commemoration today. I also want to say a tiny bit about Dean Compuris. Where is Dean? There he is under the umbrella. Dean is the founder of Sculpture at the River Market. And talk about somebody with vision. Dean has created an unbelievable public art program in our wonderful city. Little Rock is now the proud owner of approximately 121 pieces of public art. And the worth of that public art is around $4 million. That's something to be proud of, and thank you, Dean, for that. And there are actually, after this program, you may want to take a minute and look around the Vogel Swartz Sculpture Garden, which is where we are right now. There are over 71 pieces of art right here in this garden, and each one is an important piece of art. I also want to give a thank you to the Little Rock Marriott for providing our refreshments today, and the Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau for assistance with the parking and many other tasks, as they always step in to help out. Both the Marriott and the Convention Bureau have been longtime supporters of sculpture at the River Market and the Vogel Swartz Sculpture Garden. Today, we are thrilled to have some surprise guests with us. So let me tell you that the day after the Arkansas General Assembly approved what was then called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, something was missing from the press coverage. Neither the Arkansas Democrat nor the Arkansas Gazette included a quote from a woman about the passage. The press coverage in both papers merely gave a reporting of the procedures in the House and the Senate. Because women couldn't vote, they also couldn't hold elective offices. So there were no women present in either one of the bodies that could speak in favor or in opposition to the proposed amendment. The only woman mentioned in the reference to either body was a secretary who made copies of the legislation. I find that just shocking, but it was true. Today we have a chance to help correct that oversight, and it's my pleasure to ask Adolphine Fletcher Terry to come to the podium, to come up here to the podium. Where is Adolphine? There she is. Both she and her sister, Mary Fletcher, were active in the women's suffrage movement in Arkansas. So, Adolphine, I think you need to step close.
Hi. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. My name is Adolphine Fletcher Terry, and I was born here in Little Rock in the fall of 1882 to my father, John Gould Fletcher, a former Confederate captain, a former Little Rock mayor, and a former Pulaski County sheriff, and to my mother, Adolphine Krause Fletcher, who was a staunch proponent of education and of German heritage. I grew up here in Little Rock. I attended the Kramer School, and I attended the Peabody High School. I graduated in 1898 at the age of 15, and that spring I headed off to Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York, as only the second Arkansas woman to do so. My friend Blanche Martin was the first Arkansas woman to go, and we became good friends on account of that. I graduated college in 1902, and I came home back to Little Rock, and I spent a few years enjoying social life and parties, and I met my future husband, David D. Terry. I learned a few skills at the parties. I learned how to manipulate men a little bit. I learned that if you simply turn them on and let them talk, they'll have a good time. And I used that to my advantage later on to get some of my issues passed. But by 1905, it was time that I got more serious. And so Blanche and I helped start the College Club. And this is a club for women who wish to extend their education past high school, to go to college, whether it be 2 years or 4 years. And we have scholarships that we offer. And we offer them to women that are graduating from the Little Rock High School. There's one scholarship for women going to an Eastern college and another scholarship for a woman going to an Arkansas college. At the same time, Blanche and I were asked to serve on a national committee to investigate Arkansas' school system. And what we found was a very lacking school system of about 5,000 different school districts, and mostly one-room rural schoolhouses with no real supervision. So Blanche and I suggested that we consolidate these school districts into county school districts with county superintendents and have transportation for the children to get to the schools. So we spent the next few years working on that. By 1910, I married David Terry and became Adolphine Fletcher Terry. And we enjoyed a good year of marriage. 1911, we had our first son. We had David D. Terry Jr. And 1911 was busy. Besides having my first child, my sister Mary Fletcher became the president of the Political Equality League. And I knew, even though I had a family and other responsibilities, I needed to participate just like she did. So I was with the Political Equality League each time they approached the Arkansas legislature in 1911, in 1913, 1915, and finally in 1917 when they decided that they would give us the right to vote in the primary elections. But you ladies know that primaries, that's not full suffrage, so we still had a fight to go for. So we were working. In the meantime, I spent time on the Pulaski County Juvenile Court Board, working to reform the juvenile court system. In 1915, we got legislation approved to build a boys' industrial school. And in 1917, we got approval to build a girls' industrial school. And it was very important. Before this, the children would only receive education 3 months out of the year, and the other 9 months they were doing agricultural work. I believe in education. Education is a way to better yourself. And at the same time, in 1917, we entered World War I, the Great War. And I was left home. David went off to fight. He went to Camp Pike. And there was a rumor going around that he decided to enlist to escape his German wife. And that was hard on me, but I didn't let that stop me. I continued with my efforts for suffragism, and I continued to raise my family. I had 3 children by now. I had David, Mary, and Sally. And Mary suffered from a serious disease, osteogenesis imperfecta, or brittle bone disease. It was very trying. But at that same time in 1917, we received the right to vote, and that next year in 1918, I was one of the 40,000 women that voted in Arkansas in that next election, and I was very proud. And this summer, we started the League of Women Voters, and I'm happy to say that I am a charter member, because to me, the right to vote means more than just someone saying how they feel about an issue of a candidate. It represents human dignity, and the fact that a citizen has the right to express his or her opinion on a subject without fear of reprisal. And that to me is real human dignity. And so thank you for listening to my speech, and hopefully this next year we'll have full suffragism across the nation. Arkansas was the 12th state to pass the 19th Amendment here this past summer, and so we're just going to have to wait for the rest of the nation to follow up. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. That was Sidney Crosby with the Old State House Museum, and the folks behind me who dressed me today are all staff at the Old State House Museum. So let's give them a round of applause. A little up.
There you go.
All right, I'm Kathleen Pate. I serve as the chair of the Arkansas Women's Suffrage Centennial Commemoration Committee. I am delighted to be here today. We have several other important speakers, so I will be brief. I just want to make sure to thank Dean and Jane for really spearheading this effort to have the sculpture here. Arkansas does hold a unique place in the history of the women's suffrage movement, the first non-suffrage state to allow women to vote in primary elections, the second southern state, the 12th state to ratify the 19th Amendment. And this is a really big deal. If you look at the states that ratified versus the states that rejected, depending on what you call southern, there were really only 4 southern states that ratified. And I'm stretching that a little bit to say Arkansas, Texas, Kentucky, and we know that Tennessee was the 36th state. But North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana all rejected the 19th Amendment. So it's a big deal that Arkansas was one of the 36. Now, I'm not a historian, I'm a suffrage enthusiast. I'm the event director for the annual Suffrage Sprint and Stroll, fun things like that. But when I say I'm a suffrage enthusiast, I mean voting, not just women voting. I have the honor and privilege at my job to work with students and teachers and to talk to them about voting. Monday and Tuesday of this week, Wednesday and Thursday of last week, I was at Central High working with civic students, and we talked about the amendments to the Constitution. We know that the first 10 are the Bill of Rights. We know that the 18th and the 21st don't really count because that's prohibition and the repeal of prohibition. So that leaves 15 times that we as a nation have come together and amended our Constitution. And you look at those 15 amendments, that's 15 times in 228 years. depending on how you interpret them, at a minimum, a third of those relate directly to voting, but the majority of them, more than 7, I'd go 9. We can talk about this later if you want to have a discussion about the Constitution. It's my favorite thing to talk about. Those amendments are to expand, to enhance, or to ensure voting rights. So I'm thrilled that we're going to have a monument here to the women who work for women's suffrage. Keep them in mind when you have the opportunity to go to the polls. Remember that it is not just a right, but a responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Sydney, and also a big thank you to the Old State House for supporting us this morning and being here in costume and many more in spirit. From 1868 to 1908, Little Rock City Hall was located in a building which stood on Markham Street, due south of where we are right now. Part of the Old State House Convention Center, in fact, is on that site. In the late 1800s, that City Hall was the location of several meetings and speeches focused on women's suffrage. When the City Hall offices moved to their current City Hall in 1908, so did the women's suffrage meetings. While there are no longer women's suffrage meetings occupying that building, we are pleased to welcome someone who is an occupant of City Hall, Little Rock's Mayor, Frank Scott Jr. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Scott.
I can promise you I won't be terribly long. I'm a Baptist preacher, and generally I'm about 7 minutes in before I start sweating. First and foremost, I want to take this time to acknowledge Jane and Dean Campuris, City Director Campuris, for being the lion and the lioness of this sculpture garden, along with the many donors that's created this jewel that we have in the heart of our downtown area, which is our heartbeat of the city of Little Rock. But today we're here to discuss something different. And as I think back to earlier this week, I had the opportunity to celebrate a dear family friend who had just turned 90 years old. Her name was Fannie Marie Lewis. And so in 2016, she was recorded by a reporter because they saw her in line to vote. And they asked her about her weight. And she said she had no problem at all waiting because there were many people before her that waited a lifetime to vote. And so when we think about that, we have to understand the importance of time and what happens over a chronological period of time. And when we think about the 19th Amendment, I also think about my timing here, sitting in this seat in the City Hall, being the 73rd mayor of this great city. 4 of my predecessors have women that they are related to that will be inscribed here today on this sculpture. And as I think about those 4, I want to recognize and honor them, because without them, there's no Frank Scott Jr. being the 73rd mayor. And so when we think about them, we pay special honor to Mayor R.L. Dodge, John Gould Fletcher, William Whipple, and H.L. Fletcher. The 19th Amendment was not the final step to full enfranchisement. But we understand that without that step, we would have never had the Civil Rights Movement. And the Civil Rights Movement would have been a step harder. So we are grateful for the women that stood up to make certain that their voices were heard. Because by having their voices heard, made certain that my ancestors' voices were heard as well. By having the true epitome of the Civil Rights Movement. And when we understand that we have this 19th Amendment, it also forged the way that we truly could inscribe and understand what it meant to be we the people. And by understanding what we the people are, it gave us the ability to form the true, more perfect union. So we are grateful today for our ancestors here in the city of Little Rock, those women leaders that brought us to this day, that we all have the right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Scott. In 1919, it is quite likely that without the partnership of Governor Charles Bruff and his wife Anne Roy Bruff, efforts to pass the women's suffrage in Arkansas amendment might not have been successful. No prior governor or First Lady of Arkansas spoke out in favor of women's suffrage. Mrs. Bruff was a vocal and visible supporter of the movement. The governor spoke out in favor of it and used the power of his political office to promote the need for women's suffrage. It had been under Bruff's leadership that legislation was approved in 1917, which gave Arkansas women the opportunity to vote in primary elections. It is fitting that today we are joined by the current Arkansas governor and First Lady. Like the Bruffs, the Hutchinsons are a true partnership. Individually and as a couple, they have been vocal and visible supporters of the arts in Arkansas. It's my honor to ask Governor Hutchinson to come to the podium. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Jane, and the First Lady and I are delighted to participate in this occasion. I want to compliment the Mayor Frank Scott, for framing the importance of this day so well and put it in historic perspective. As I look at this incredible sculpture garden, I think of the times that Susan woke up and said, let's go to the sculpture garden. And we walked down here, and as we would walk and enjoy the art, the sculptures, the history ourselves, we would meet visitors from all over the United States that would be enjoying it as well. And now with this new sculpture that's being added to commemorate the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, people will be able to connect not just the art, but the history and Arkansas's role in that incredible event that really set the stage for progress in the United States, for women's participation, not just their vote, but their participation. And I think about what it means to this administration. I see great women leaders like Secretary Hurst, that whenever you have the women's suffrage, it leads to women's participation and women's influence. And without that historic part that we played in the time 100 years ago, we would not have the women in our cabinet today that makes a difference in Arkansas government. I'm delighted to see the Central High students that are here that represent Arkansas so well. Would you all be recognized once again? Give them a round of applause, and please stand, students. And just to recite for a moment one of the ladies that are mentioned in this is Josephine Miller Brown, one of the early leaders. And she not only fought for suffrage, but then she continued to teach women how to register and how to participate. And she was elected one of the 10 women delegates to the 1916 Democratic National Convention. And I don't know that if any of them were elected to the Republican National Convention. I doubt it, because there weren't very many back then. But it was an historic day. And then finally, I want to pay respect to Jane DeDecker for your incredible contribution to us here in the Arkansas. And I am anxious to see the sculpture revealed. And I love the title, Every Word We Utter, because it is a reminder of our responsibility that words make a difference. But it also leaves you a little bit hanging, that you can finish that phrase. Every word we utter makes a difference. Every word we utter, we will be held accountable for. Every word we utter can bring people together. And so congratulations, Jane, and thank you for the contributions that you've made to Arkansas. Thank you.
Well, the plaza, which is right here inside this park, could have sufficed as a way to mark the centennial of the passage of the 19th Amendment. it would not have given the milestone the prominence that it deserves. The addition of Jane D. Decker's sculpture, Every Word We Utter, transforms this space from a simple plaza really to a landmark. Those of us involved with sculpture at the River Market do not need an introduction to Jane D. Decker. Just look around the park and you'll see several of her delightful pieces of art. But today, with this dedication, I think this project takes her work to the next level within Little Rock. I'm delighted to ask Jane to come to the podium to speak for a minute.
Well, Dean told me that I could talk as long as I wanted to, so hi Dean. Thank you, everyone here. Thank you for the donors. Thank you for every name inscribed here who have inspired and moved this movement forward. Without them, without their contributions, we may have never have voted. So it's so important that all these women are recognized and celebrated. I am so happy to be here to commemorate this, the movement and the celebration of the passage of the 19th Amendment, the women's right to vote. I want to talk a little bit about the composition here in the sculpture. The nucleus that you'll see is Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Elizabeth Cady Stanton came back from a suffrage convention in London and was not able to speak and not able to participate in the room where she had traveled so far to go to help abolition. So when she came back, she was bent on writing the Declaration of Sentiments that you'll see here in the sculpture. So the very beginning of the 19th Amendment is here. And then she met Susan B. Anthony, who at the age of 17 started writing petitions to get equal pay for teachers. So she started at a very young age to help make constitutional change. Both these women became a unified force, and without their contributions and wanting to sort of make constitutional change, we probably wouldn't be here today. So one of the women here on the sculpture is someone who I have loved since I was a child, Sojourner Truth. She was one of the very first voices of the women's movement. She was, to me, I'm humbled by her being treated like she was as a child and still believes as a woman and still believed and loved humanity. And she met Abraham Lincoln right after the emancipation and lived in DC and tried to help the newly freed slaves with affordable housing and education, and that was over 160 years ago that she was fighting for that. So it's just amazing to me that these women just dedicated their lives. The piece is sort of based on a drop of water. The women on the bottom tier of the sculpture are the women who fought for the right to vote but never were able to vote. They are like the drop of water of change. And you'll see that the daughters, the women who rise above, standing on the shoulders of the giants, standing together, are Alice Paul and Ida B. Wells. They represent the women who were unafraid to carry on the work of the early suffragists. You'll see the young daughter represented, Harriet's only daughter, Harriet Stanton Blatch. Elizabeth's only daughter, Harriet Stanton Blatch, is there to represent the young women. And she said if it wasn't for her and for Alice Paul, that it may have never been ratified, because she came back from Europe and re-energized the women's movement, and she's there with the ratification flag, representing the 36 states that ratified the 19th Amendment. Beside her is Ida B. Wells, who I truly admire. One of her quotes is, "The way to right the wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." And I just feel like she is a huge influence on the women's movement. So when do we get to uncover it? Oh, I can't wait to share it with you. So we were just talking about the design of the sculpture and how it's based on a drop of water and the ripples. And the ripples, in my artist statement, I believe that the words of the suffragists still resonate. For these words were meant for action. Indeed, these words became action. Actions became the movement, and the movement continues to set the world right side up again. When a water droplet impacts a body of water, it pushes outwards and rebounds upwards as a smaller droplet. The daughter droplet gains height, falling back into the water, which is called the coalescent cascade. This describes the height, the breadth, and the lasting impact of the suffragist work. And this park is beautifully designed for this piece. We were talking with the architects yesterday. This piece is sort of like that impact, that drop of water in this beautiful plaza that sort of represents the ripples of change. So I am so grateful to be here, and thank you so much.
Inscribed in this plaza are the names of several Arkansas women who participated in the women's suffrage movement, as Janie was saying. Some of them, like Josephine Miller Brown, Bernie Babcock, Mary Burt Brooks, and Adolphine Fletcher Terry, have descendants still in Little Rock today. And there are others. I just named a few. If you're one of the descendants of one of these women, wave your hand. I mean, we've got several in the crowd. Yeah, thank you. Each name listed represents the thousands of women who worked over a 70-year time period in Arkansas to ensure women would have the right to vote. As we dedicate this plaza and this sculpture, we do so in honor of all of these women. And now it's time for the presentation, finally, of the sculpture to the city. If Mrs. Hutchinson, yes, not the governor, Martha Hill, I want Martha to come forward, Stacy Hurst, and Dean. We're gonna let one guy, yes, you have to. If y'all will join, the script says everybody, and Janie, everybody else, so y'all get to come too. The guy, the script says that y'all get to come too, so we'll get some other guys. Come on, get up here, and we will pull the string and open it. Okay, let's see. We want to get a photograph of this.
Yep, you gotta get in here.
Yeah.
Get the ladies in. We're back.
We're background.
Okay.
We're the ultimate background.
Stacy, yeah. Y'all come over here. There we go. Okay.
Well, no, y'all, we're the background.
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
It's your gift.
Here we go. Now, hold your breath. Can you do it? Just don't want it to fall over. I know it's not going to. No. Oh, look at that. Well, we appreciate everybody being here today and suffering through this little bit of heat, I must say. But thank you, and have some more lemonade, have some more cookies, and come and look at it up close. Thank you. Oh, thank you all.